I still remember the exact sound of my phone ringing that Tuesday morning. It wasn't a special day. I was standing in my kitchen, wearing an old oversized sweater, drinking cold coffee, and staring at a pile of unopened bills on my counter. My life at that moment was small, quiet, ordinary, and I had made peace with that. My name is Serena. I'm 31 years old. I teach elementary school. I live alone in a two-bedroom apartment in a city that feels too big for someone like me. And for most of my life, I had one defining fact about myself that I held onto like an anchor. My father was a Navy SEAL. He passed away when I was 19. A car accident, they told us. Quiet funeral, small gathering. My mother cried for 3 days straight and then never spoke his name again. I learned to do the same. His name was David Harlow, and to me, he was just Dad. A tall, quiet man who smelled like pine soap and never raised his voice. A man who was gone for months at a time and always came back with foreign chocolates and a tired smile. A man who sat at the edge of my bed when I had nightmares and said, "Nothing can touch you, Serena, not while I'm here." He wasn't wealthy. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. After he died, my mother worked double shifts at the hospital for years. I put myself through college on loans and part-time jobs. I never once felt cheated by life, because I believed my father had given us everything he had. That Tuesday morning, I almost didn't answer the call. The number was international, long string of digits I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some small, quiet pull in my chest made me pick up. "Is this Serena Harlow?" The voice was deep, official, the kind of voice that fills a room even through a phone speaker. "Yes," I said slowly. "Who is this?" There was a brief pause. Then, "My name is General Raymond Caldwell, 4-star General, United States Army. Miss Harlow, I knew your father." I set my coffee cup down. I don't know why, but my hand started shaking before he even said another word. Something in my body understood what my mind hadn't caught up to yet, that this call was going to cost me something, that whoever I was before this moment, I would not be the same person after it. "I need you to fly to Geneva," he said. "There are things about your father that you deserve to know, things that have been kept from you for a very long time." I almost laughed. Geneva. He wanted me, a school teacher drowning in student loan debt, to fly to Geneva. "General," I said carefully, "my father was a Navy SEAL. He passed away 12 years ago. I'm not sure what there is to—" "Miss Harlow." His voice was gentle but firm, the way you speak to someone right before you deliver news that changes everything. "Your father was not just a Navy SEAL." The silence that followed lasted 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds stretched out like years. "Everything has been arranged," he continued. "A ticket is waiting at O'Hare under your name, first class, departing Thursday. I know this is a great deal to ask, but I promise you, you will want to hear what I have to say." I stood in my kitchen for a long time after the call ended. The bills were still on the counter. The coffee was still cold. The city outside my window was still loud and indifferent. But I was different, because for the first time in 12 years, someone had said my father's name like it mattered, like it carried weight, like the story of David Harlow wasn't finished. I booked a substitute for my class. I packed a carry-on bag, and on Thursday morning, I flew to Geneva, not knowing if I was about to receive a gift or a wound. As it turned out, it was both. Geneva in November is gray and quiet and breathtakingly beautiful. I remember stepping out of the airport and feeling the cold air hit my face like a warning. A driver was already waiting with a sign that read Harlow. He didn't speak much. He drove me through clean, narrow streets lined with bare trees until we reached a building that looked more like a private estate than an office. General Caldwell met me at the door himself. He was older than I expected, mid-70s maybe. Silver-haired, straight-backed, with eyes that had seen too many things to be anything but calm. He shook my hand firmly and led me into a wood-paneled room where a fire was burning and a thick folder sat on a table between two chairs. "Thank you for coming, Serena," he said. "I know this wasn't easy." "Tell me about my father," I said. I didn't want tea, I didn't want small talk. I had flown across an ocean for the truth, and I was going to get it. He nodded slowly, and then he told me. My father, David Harlow, had not simply been a Navy SEAL. He had been recruited in his late 20s into a classified intelligence program that operated across 3 continents. He spoke 4 languages I never knew about. He had prevented 2 international incidents that never made the news. He had worked for over a decade as one of the most quietly decorated operatives in a program so classified that even most generals didn't know it existed. "He was brilliant," Caldwell said softly, "and deeply humble. He never wanted recognition. He only wanted to protect people." I stared at the fire. "Then why," I whispered, "did he let us believe he was just gone? Just a car accident and a small funeral, and that was it?" Caldwell opened the folder. "Because he was protecting you," he said. "There were people, dangerous people, who had spent years trying to identify the operatives in this program. Your father made a choice to erase his own legacy so that you and your mother would never become targets." He slid a photograph across the table. It was my father, younger, maybe 35, standing in what looked like a formal military ceremony, shaking hands with a man I recognized immediately, a foreign head of state. My father was receiving a medal. My throat closed. "There's more," Caldwell said gently. And that was when the story shifted, because it wasn't just about my father's heroism. It was about what happened after he died. There was a man named Warren Cole, my father's former commanding officer and supposedly his closest friend, a man who had attended my father's funeral, hugged my grieving mother, and looked me in the eye at 19 years old and said, "Your dad was one of the best men I ever knew." Warren Cole, I learned that afternoon in Geneva, had spent 12 years quietly collecting on my father's legacy. There were accounts, funds set aside for my father's family as part of the classified program's welfare provisions. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough that my mother wouldn't have worked those double shifts for years. Enough that I wouldn't have taken those loans. Enough that someone who had sacrificed everything in silence would have known his family was taken care of. Warren Cole had redirected every cent, forged signatures, filed paperwork that listed my mother as uncontactable. Quietly, systematically, over 12 years, he had stolen from a dead hero's family while standing at his grave and calling him a brother. I sat in that chair in Geneva, and I felt something I had never felt in my life. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't even anger, at least not yet. It was a cold, clear, devastating clarity. My father had been extraordinary, and the people around him let us grieve in ignorance while they helped themselves to everything he left behind. I looked at General Caldwell. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. He folded his hands. "Because Warren Cole is being considered for a presidential appointment next month, and because your father deserved better. And so did you." I flew home from Geneva a different woman. The grief I carried for 12 years had just transformed into something with sharp edges and a clear direction, and I was not going to waste it. I want you to understand something about revenge. The movies make it look loud, explosive, dramatic, a confrontation in the rain, someone screaming, something shattering. Real revenge, the kind that actually lasts, is quiet. It is paperwork and patience and the slow, deliberate unwinding of a lie that someone thought was permanent. When I got home from Geneva, I didn't call Warren Cole. I didn't post anything online. I didn't tell a single friend. I called a lawyer. General Caldwell had already begun quietly gathering documentation, 12 years' worth of financial records, forged signatures, redirected transfers. He connected me with a military legal advocate who specialized in exactly these kinds of classified welfare fraud cases. Within 6 weeks, we had a file so complete, so documented, so undeniable that the lawyer looked at me across her desk and said, "Ms. Harlow, this man made a very serious mistake assuming your family would never find out." Warren Cole was 3 weeks away from his presidential appointment announcement when the file landed on the right desks. I wasn't in the room when it happened. I didn't need to be. I was told it was swift, an emergency review, investigators who asked questions Cole couldn't answer without incriminating himself. Within 48 hours, his appointment was quietly withdrawn. Within 2 months, he was formally charged with military welfare fraud and breach of fiduciary duty, charges that carry weight in ways that public humiliation never could. He didn't get to stand in the White House. He stood in a federal courtroom instead. And here is the part I want you to sit with, because this is the part that changed me the most. At some point during the legal process, I was given the opportunity to submit a victim impact statement. My mother and I sat together at her kitchen table, the same kitchen where she had cried for 3 days after my father's funeral, the same kitchen where she used to pack 2 lunches before working a double shift, and we wrote it together. We wrote about my father, not about his classified missions or his medals or the photograph of him shaking hands with foreign dignitaries. We wrote about the man who smelled like pine soap, who brought back foreign chocolates, who sat at the edge of a little girl's bed and said, "Nothing can touch you." We wrote about what it cost us to lose him twice, once to death and once to the silence that someone chose on our behalf. When the statement was read in court, Warren Cole didn't look at us. I noticed that. I filed it away. A man who truly believed he had done nothing wrong would have looked us in the eye. The fact that he couldn't told me everything about what he already knew. My father's welfare funds were recovered and released to us, with 12 years of accrued interest factored into the restitution. It wasn't life-changing wealth, but my mother was able to retire from the hospital shifts that had aged her before her time, and I was able to clear the student loans I had spent a decade quietly resenting. But the money was never really the point. The point was that my father's name was restored. In a small, private ceremony, nothing public, nothing loud, General Caldwell presented my mother and me with a formal recognition of my father's service, his real service, the full picture, the man behind the quiet smiles and the long absences and the foreign chocolates. My mother held the commendation in both hands and cried in a way I had never seen her cry before. Not the grief crying from the funeral. Something else. Something that looked almost like relief. Like she had always known he was more than the world gave him credit for, and she had finally been given permission to say so out loud. I think about that moment a lot, because here is what I learned from all of it. The phone call, the flight, the folder on the table in Geneva, the courtroom, the ceremony. Silence is not always protection. Sometimes silence is just the shape that cowardice takes when it wants to look noble. My father chose silence to protect us. I understand that now. I even honor it. But Warren Cole chose silence to profit, and those two silences look identical from the outside, which is exactly what he was counting on. The difference only becomes visible when someone is finally willing to ask questions. So if there is anything I want you to take from my story, whether you are carrying your own unanswered questions, your own grief, your own sense that something was taken from you before you were old enough to fight for it, let it be this. It is never too late to ask. It is never too late to fly across an ocean for the truth. And the people who built their comfort on your silence are always, always more afraid of your questions than you are of their answers. My father protected me for 19 years. It was time I protected him back. And I did.